The sun was already dipping behind the hills when the sound of laughter and music filled the air of the little town. Every summer, people from nearby villages came together for the annual Riverside Music Festival. The smell of roasted corn and the sound of children chasing each other through the crowd gave the evening a warm, happy feeling. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and where music wasn't about money or fame. It was about joy. Among the crowd, a young woman named Lena Morales stood near the edge of the stage, holding her trumpet case close to her chest. She wasn't famous and she didn't dress like someone who expected to be noticed. Her faded denim jacket and scuffed shoes told their own quiet story. But when she played, something in her came alive. Music wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. Her late father had taught her everything he knew about the trumpet, and whenever she played, it felt like he was still there, smiling somewhere in the sound. That evening, Lena wasn't on the main lineup. She was just one of the local performers, invited to warm up the crowd before the big acts came on. Still, she felt nervous. Her palms were sweating as she waited for her turn behind the stage. She could already hear the noise of the crowd cheering for the performer before her, a name she had only ever heard on the radio or seen on YouTube. Julian Cross. Even saying his name made her stomach twist. He wasn't just a good trumpet player, he was one of the best in the world. People talked about him like he was untouchable, a man who made music sound effortless. His charm, his confidence, the way he smiled at the audience, it was like he was born to be up there. Lena never imagined she would perform on the same stage as someone like him. She peeked around the curtain and watched him play. His golden trumpet shone under the lights, and the crowd swayed with his every note. The band behind him followed his lead perfectly. Every gesture he made looked smooth, practiced, and sure. He hit high notes that made the audience cheer and then dipped into soft melodies that pulled at their hearts. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. He made it all seem so easy. When his performance ended, the crowd roared. Julian lifted his trumpet in the air, smiling with the easy confidence of a man who knew he had just owned the night. And then, as he walked backstage, his eyes fell on Lena. She was standing there with her trumpet in hand, ready to go on next, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Julian looked at her curiously, then smiled in a way that felt both kind and teasing. "Are you up next?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. His voice was warm, but there was a playful edge to it. Yes," Lena said, trying not to sound nervous. "Just the community band slot." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Community band, huh? That's brave. Following after me." He chuckled, clearly meaning it as a joke, but Lena's cheeks grew hot. "I guess someone has to keep the music going," she said quietly. Her answer seemed to surprise him. He tilted his head, studying her for a moment. Then, with that same mischievous grin, he lifted his trumpet slightly. "Tell you what," he said. "Why don't we make it interesting, a little friendly duel?" Lena blinked. "A duel? Yeah. You play your best tune, and I'll play mine. Let the crowd decide who wins." A few of the stagehands nearby laughed. Someone shouted, "Oh, this'll be good." Lena's heart sank. She hadn't expected this. She'd just come to play a few songs for fun, not to go up against a world-class performer. Julian must have seen the panic on her face because he added, "Don't worry, I'm just joking around. No pressure." But it was too late. The challenge hung in the air and people had already started whispering about it. Someone called out, "Hey, trumpet duel after the break," and the crowd started buzzing. Lena wanted to disappear. Her friend and bandmate, Rosa, put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it," she whispered. "He's just showing off. You can stick to your set." But Lena wasn't sure. Something inside her, maybe pride, maybe her father's voice in the back of her mind, told her she couldn't back down. She had been practicing for years in that small garage behind her house, dreaming that someday someone would hear her play and know she had something real to offer. If she walked away now, that dream would shrink back into silence. So she took a deep breath and nodded. "No," she said softly. "I'll do it." When she stepped onto the stage a few minutes later, her knees felt weak. The crowd was larger now, excited to see the girl who had been challenged by Julian Cross. She could feel their eyes on her, curious and expectant. She lifted her trumpet and tried to steady her breathing. The night air was cool against her skin, and somewhere out in the darkness, she could hear the river flowing. "Next up," the host announced, "we have one of our own, Lena Morales, and rumor has it we might have a little trumpet face-off tonight." The audience cheered, some of them laughing, others clapping in encouragement. Lena smiled awkwardly, trying to ignore the pressure. She lifted her trumpet and began to play. At first her hands trembled, and her notes came out a little too sharp, but as she continued, something shifted. She closed her eyes, and the sound began to smooth out. The melody she played wasn't complicated. It was simple, heartfelt, something her father used to hum while fixing the old radio in their kitchen. Slowly the crowd quieted. The laughter faded, replaced by soft attention. Lena's tone grew warmer, fuller. The song told a story without words, a story of missing someone, of holding on to memories, of finding beauty in the small things. When she finished, the applause wasn't wild or loud. It was genuine. People clapped because they felt something. Julian, standing off to the side, had stopped smiling. For a moment he looked thoughtful, even impressed. He walked onto the stage, trumpet in hand. "Not bad," he said, grinning again. But this time the grin seemed different, less teasing, more curious. "But I think we can make this crowd really sing, don't you?" Lena hesitated. "You still want that duel?" "Oh, come on," he said lightly. "It'll be fun." The crowd started cheering again, encouraging them both. And just like that, the festival turned into something no one had planned. Julian lifted his trumpet first. His notes were bright and daring, filled with energy. He played quick runs, clever twists, music that showed skill and control. The audience whistled and clapped, loving his showmanship. Then he gestured to Lena. "Your turn." She took a breath, her heart racing. She didn't try to match his style. Instead, she played the same tune she had started earlier, but this time, she added small improvisations, little ripples of sound that made it feel alive. She didn't care about being better. She cared about being true. The two of them went back and forth, trading melodies. Julian's notes were sharp and confident. Lena's were softer but full of emotion. The crowd couldn't decide who to cheer for. They were drawn to both in different ways. When the final note faded into the night, there was silence. Then applause broke out again, louder than before. People were on their feet, cheering for both of them. Julian lowered his trumpet and looked at Lena. "You've got something special," he said quietly, his earlier arrogance gone. Lena smiled shyly. "I just play what I feel." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what I've been missing." The host came back up, laughing. "Looks like this duel's a draw. How about a duet next time?" The audience loved the idea, and laughter filled the air once more. Lena didn't know what to think. Just a few hours ago, she had been nobody, a girl from a small town who loved her trumpet. Now she had played alongside one of the most famous musicians in the country, and he had looked at her as an equal. As she walked off the stage, she could still feel the warmth of the lights on her skin, the echo of applause in her ears, and a quiet sense that something had changed. Maybe it was small. Maybe it wouldn't mean anything tomorrow. But tonight, under the festival sky, she had played with all her heart, and it had been enough. Julian watched her leave, his trumpet hanging loosely at his side. He didn't know why, but something about that girl's playing had touched him in a way he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was real. And deep down, he knew that this simple trumpet duel was only the beginning of something that neither of them could yet understand. The night after the festival, Lena couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the sound of the crowd cheering, saw the bright lights on the stage, and remembered Julian Cross standing beside her, smiling like he had seen something he didn't expect. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her trumpet resting on the chair next to her bed. It looked different now, almost like it carried the memory of that night inside it. Her small room was filled with little reminders of music, old posters, dusty sheet music, and photos of her father holding his trumpet with that proud, gentle grin. He had passed away 3 years ago, but his voice still echoed in her mind. "Play from your heart, Lena. That's where the truth lives." She smiled a little, hearing those words again. That was what she did on that stage. She hadn't tried to outshine Julian. She had just played what she felt. The next morning, the whole town was talking about the Trumpet Duel. People at the bakery, the post office, even kids at the bus stop. All of them were saying how amazing it was. Lena felt embarrassed hearing her name brought up so much. She wasn't used to attention. She just liked to play. That was enough for her. When she walked down to the music hall that morning, Rosa came running toward her. "Lena," she said, out of breath. "You won't believe it, Julian's still in town." Lena frowned. "Still here, why?" "They said he's staying at the hotel near the lake. Apparently he asked about you." Lena froze. "Asked about me? Why would he do that?" Rosa grinned. "Maybe he wants a rematch." Lena shook her head. "No, he was just being nice. He's probably forgotten about me already." But that afternoon, when Lena was helping clean up after the festival, a familiar black car pulled up beside the stage. The driver got out first, followed by Julian himself. He wore simple clothes this time. No flashy jacket, no stage lights, just jeans and a dark shirt. He looked less like a star and more like a regular person. When he saw her, he smiled. "There you are," he said, walking over. "I was hoping I'd find you here." Lena felt her face flush. "Oh, hi. I didn't think you'd still be around." "I stayed an extra day," he said, glancing around the empty field. "I wanted to talk." She hesitated. "About what?" "About that duel," he said with a grin. "You surprised me, you know. I thought I'd be the one giving a lesson, but it turns out I got one instead." Lena didn't know what to say. She laughed nervously. "I don't think I taught you anything." "Actually, you did," he said seriously. "You reminded me what music's supposed to feel like. I've been playing for so long that sometimes it's just work. You played with heart. No show, no tricks. Just music." His words caught her off guard. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from someone like him. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." Julian smiled. "Listen, I have an idea. I'm doing a concert in the city next month. Big show, lots of press, live audience. I want you to come. Play with me." Her eyes widened. "Me? You're joking." "I'm not," he said. "You've got something real, Lena. People need to hear it." She shook her head quickly. No, I can't. I've never played in front of that many people." "I'm not ready for that," Julian chuckled. "You already played in front of hundreds last night and handled it better than most professionals I know." "That was different," she said. "That was just the festival." "Maybe," he said with a shrug. "But think about it. I'll leave you my number. You can call me if you change your mind." He handed her a small card, smiled one more time, and walked back to the car. Lena stood there staring at the card in her hand for a long time. She couldn't believe what had just happened. That night, she told Rosa what he'd said. Rosa nearly screamed. "Lena, that's huge." "You can't say no." "I don't know," Lena said. "It feels too big. He's famous." "I'm just—" Rosa shook her head. "You're scared, that's all. But if your dad were here, you know what he'd say." Lena sighed. "Yeah, he'd say, don't let fear play your notes for you." The days passed slowly. Every time Lena picked up her trumpet, she thought about Julian's invitation. She tried to imagine standing on a huge stage, the crowd cheering, lights shining in her eyes. It made her heart race, both with excitement and fear. Part of her wanted to stay in her comfort zone, playing small gigs with her community band. But another part, the part her father would have encouraged, wanted to see how far she could go. Finally, after a week of overthinking, she called the number. "Hello?" Julian's voice came through calm and friendly. "It's Lena," she said. "About your concert." "Ah," he said, sounding pleased. "I was hoping you'd call. So what do you say?" "I'll do it," she said quickly before she could change her mind. "Good," he said. "You won't regret it." Over the next few weeks, Lena practiced every day. She worked at the music hall in the mornings, then spent her afternoons with her trumpet. Rosa helped her go over songs, offering honest feedback. There were days when Lena doubted herself, days when she almost backed out, but then she'd hear her father's voice in her head again, reminding her why she started. One evening, while she was practicing near the river, a small group of kids gathered to listen. When she finished, one of them said, You play better than the radio lady. Lena laughed. You mean Julian's recordings? The little boy nodded. No, he said seriously. Yours feels like a story. That simple comment gave her more courage than anything else. Maybe she didn't need to be perfect. Maybe she just needed to be real. When the day of the concert arrived, Lena traveled to the city. It was her first time there. The tall buildings, the fast cars, the endless lights, it all made her dizzy. She carried her trumpet case tightly, afraid to lose it in the crowd. At the concert hall, she found Julian waiting on stage, running through sound checks. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. You made it. I almost didn't, she admitted. The bus ride was longer than I thought, he laughed. You're here now. That's what matters. He showed her around, introduced her to the band members, and helped her get comfortable. Everyone was kind, but she still felt out of place. These people were professionals, used to big audiences and bright lights. She was just a small-town girl who had played at fairs and weddings. During rehearsal, she made a few mistakes, and her face burned with embarrassment. But Julian just smiled and said, Relax. You don't need to play like me. Play like you. That made her smile. She took a deep breath and started again, this time focusing on the feeling, not the fear. The melody came alive, and Julian nodded approvingly. When rehearsal ended, they sat together backstage. Julian handed her a bottle of water and said, You know, when I started, I was just like you, nervous, unsure. Then I realized, music isn't about how good you are compared to someone else. It's about what you give to people when you play. Lena looked at him thoughtfully. Do you still feel nervous? He laughed softly. Every time. The day I stop feeling it, I'll stop playing. That made her feel better somehow. As the evening approached, the concert hall filled with people. The noise of the crowd echoed through the backstage area. Lena peeked out and saw hundreds of faces waiting. Her stomach turned. She felt small again, like she did that first night before the festival. Julian touched her shoulder. You'll be fine, he said quietly. Just remember why you play. When the lights dimmed, the announcer introduced them. Julian walked on first, greeted by thunderous applause. Then he turned, gesturing toward the side stage. And tonight, he said into the microphone, I have a special guest. Someone who reminded me what music really means. The spotlight found Lena. The audience clapped politely at first, curious. She stepped out slowly, her trumpet trembling slightly in her hand. She looked at Julian. He nodded once, signaling her to start. She lifted her trumpet and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, but then she remembered the kids by the river, her father's lessons, and the warmth of that festival night. She closed her eyes and let the sound flow from her heart. The melody rose and fell like a voice telling a story, gentle, honest, and full of feeling. When she finished, the hall was silent for a moment. Then applause filled the room, loud, genuine, and full of emotion. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Julian joined her in the final song, their trumpets weaving together beautifully, his polished skill blending with her raw sincerity. It wasn't a duel anymore. It was harmony. As the music ended, Julian turned to her and whispered, See? I told you. You belong here. Lena smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. She had never felt so alive, so certain that this was where she was meant to be. That night, after the concert, people came up to her with words of praise and gratitude. Reporters wanted to know who she was. But Lena didn't care about the attention. She only cared that, for the first time, she felt her father would be proud. And as she walked out of the hall into the cool night air, trumpet case in hand, she knew that her life had just changed forever. The morning after the concert felt unreal for Lena. She woke up in her small hotel room, sunlight spilling through the curtains, her trumpet case resting beside her bed like an old friend. For a moment, she just stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The sound of the crowd still echoed in her ears, the clapping, the cheers, the standing ovation that had taken her by surprise. It felt like a dream, something too big for someone like her. She had played on a huge stage beside Julian Cross, a man whose music had inspired thousands, and somehow, she had held her own. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. There was a note on the nightstand folded neatly. She picked it up and recognized Julian's handwriting immediately. You were brilliant last night. Let's meet at the cafe by the lake at noon. Jay, her heart skipped a beat. She smiled without meaning to. By the time she arrived at the cafe, Julian was already there, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee and a small notebook open in front of him. He looked relaxed, nothing like the man who had filled an entire concert hall with sound just hours before. He looked up as she walked in and waved. "There you are. I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." "I almost did," she said honestly. "I thought maybe you'd be too busy for small-town company." He chuckled. "After last night? You're not small-town anymore." Lena sat down, feeling shy but happy. "It still doesn't feel real." "It will," Julian said. "You earned every clap, every bit of that applause. You played from the heart, and that's something people never forget." Lena smiled softly. "I just played the way my father taught me. He used to say the trumpet was like talking to the world without words." Julian leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. He was right. You can't fake what you did on that stage. That kind of honesty in music is rare. They talked for a long time about music, life, their first performances, and all the times they had messed up and learned from it. Julian told her about his early days playing in smoky bars, barely making enough to eat, and how fame had changed everything, and not always for the better. After a while, he admitted, "I started playing to impress people instead of express myself. You made me remember what it felt like to play just because you love it." Lena didn't know what to say to that. It felt strange to hear someone so accomplished say they had learned something from her. When they left the cafe, Julian stopped near the door and turned to her. "I'm going to Europe next month for a short tour. I want you to come with me." Lena blinked. "Europe?" He nodded. "Just a few shows. Paris, Milan, Vienna. You'd be part of the band." "You've got something special, Lena. The world should hear it." Her heart raced. "I don't know if I can... that's a lot." Julian smiled. "You said that before the city concert, remember? And you still did it. Trust me, you'll be fine." She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "It's just everything's happening so fast." "That's life," he said gently. "When it offers you a chance, you take it." Lena didn't give him an answer that day. She went home first. She needed time to think. Back in her town, things were different. People who had barely noticed her before now stopped her in the street. The local paper had written about her performance with Julian Cross, calling her the small-town girl with the golden sound. Kids at the music school wanted to take lessons from her, and her old bandmates looked at her with pride. But in the quiet of her room, it all felt heavy. She missed the simplicity of playing by the river, just for herself. She wasn't sure if she was ready for fame or tours or the kind of life Julian lived. Her mother noticed the change in her mood. One evening, while Lena was sitting at the kitchen table polishing her trumpet, her mother said softly, "You're thinking too much again." Lena smiled faintly. "I guess I am." "You've always been like that," her mother said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your father used to say you carried the world in your music. Maybe now the world is ready to listen." Those words stayed with her. A week later, she called Julian. "I'll come," she said simply. He sounded genuinely happy. "I knew you would. You won't regret it." The next few weeks went by in a blur. There were rehearsals, travel plans, endless paperwork, and a passport renewal that nearly gave her a headache. Julian's team helped her with everything, but it was still overwhelming. She often caught herself wondering if she really belonged in that world, but when she picked up her trumpet, all her doubts disappeared. Music still felt the same. The sound, the breath, the rhythm. It all reminded her that she wasn't pretending to be anyone. She was just Lena Morales from a little riverside town who loved to play. The first stop of the tour was Paris. When she stepped off the plane, the air smelled different: fresh bread, coffee, rain. The streets were alive with color and sound. Julian showed her around, pointing out landmarks and street musicians. "See?" he said with a grin. "Music is everywhere here. You'll fit right in." The concert was in an old theater with golden lights and red velvet seats. During rehearsal, Lena's nerves came back. The stage felt enormous, and the audience, she was told, would include critics and reporters from across Europe. Before the show, Julian came over and handed her a small silver pin shaped like a trumpet. "I wore this at my first big concert," he said. "It's kind of a lucky charm. Now it's yours." Lena stared at it, touched. "Are you sure?" He smiled. "Positive. You've already got the talent. Now you've got the luck." When the concert began, she felt the same rush she had felt back home. Fear mixed with excitement, but this time she didn't let it control her. The lights were bright, The music soared, and when it was her turn to solo, she let herself go completely. The audience listened, silent and still. When her last note faded, there was a moment of quiet, and then a wave of applause that felt like a storm. She looked over at Julian, and he was smiling proudly, eyes shining. After the show, people came backstage to congratulate her. Some wanted autographs, others just wanted to say how moved they were. One older man with gray hair and kind eyes told her, "You play with truth, young lady. Don't ever lose that." Later that night, Julian and the band went out to celebrate. They laughed, shared stories, and toasted to new beginnings. Lena sat there listening, smiling, feeling like she was part of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. But as the night grew quieter, she found herself standing on the hotel balcony, looking out over the city lights. She thought about her town, her mother, her father, the kids by the river who had listened to her play. She missed them. Julian joined her a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might want one," he said. "Thanks," she said, taking it. He leaned on the railing beside her. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Just thinking. Everything's changing so fast," he smiled softly. "That's how life works when you start following your music. It takes you places you never planned to go." She looked at him. "Does it ever slow down?" "Sometimes," he said. "But you learn to carry home with you. Every note you play, every stage you stand on, it all comes from who you are." "You don't lose that." Lena looked out at the glittering skyline. "I hope not. I don't ever want to lose where I came from." Julian sipped his tea. "You won't. That's what makes you different." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of the city. When Lena finally went to bed that night, she felt something she hadn't felt before. It wasn't fear or even excitement. It was peace. She realized that music wasn't about big crowds or bright lights. It was about connection, the quiet, invisible thread between people who felt something when they heard her play. That was what her father had meant all along. The next morning, when the band prepared to leave for Milan, Lena felt ready. She had no idea what awaited her on the rest of the tour, but she knew she would face it the same way she always had, with her heart wide open and her trumpet in her hands. And somewhere deep inside, she also knew that her story was just beginning. The train rolled through the countryside as the band made their way from Milan to Vienna. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Lena sat by the window, her trumpet case resting beside her, and watched the world pass by. Every mile seemed to carry her further from the quiet town she had once called home. It had been 3 weeks since the tour began. Every night she played on a different stage in a different city, in front of people who spoke different languages but shared the same love for music. The faces blurred together, but the applause never lost its magic. Still, something inside her felt heavier with each passing day. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion. The endless travel, late nights, and constant rehearsals were hard to keep up with. But there was something else too, a quiet feeling that she couldn't name. Julian had been kind, as always. He guided her, gave her space when she needed it, and made sure she was treated well by everyone. But Lena had started to notice something in him, a certain sadness that showed in small moments. When he thought no one was watching, he'd stare off into space, his fingers tapping quietly against his trumpet, as if trying to remember a tune that had slipped away. One night after a concert in Munich, Lena found him sitting alone on the edge of the stage. The hall empty except for a few workers packing up equipment. He was holding his trumpet, not playing, just turning it over in his hands. "You should get some rest," Lena said softly, walking over. He looked up, smiling faintly. "Can't sleep," he said. "Too many notes in my head." She sat beside him. "You look distracted tonight," he sighed. "Yeah, I was." There was a long pause before he continued. "You know, I used to love touring. The lights, the people, the rush of it all. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like music. It started feeling like business." Lena glanced at him. "Is that why you wanted me here? To remind you?" He smiled a little. "Maybe. Or maybe I just needed someone who still remembers what it's like to play for the love of it." She thought about that for a moment. "You still have that love. I can see it when you play," Julian chuckled quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just fake it better now." Lena shook her head. "No, you don't fake it. You just forgot what it feels like. It's still there, waiting for you." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "You sound like my father used to." "What was he like?" "He was a teacher. Julian said. Taught music at a small school. He wanted me to play because I loved it, not because I wanted fame. But after he died, I got caught up chasing success. I thought that's what would make him proud. Lena nodded quietly. My father was the same way. He used to tell me, if you play honestly, someone will always listen. Julian smiled. Sounds like they would have been friends. They sat there for a while in comfortable silence. The hall was dim except for the faint light from the stage. It was one of those rare quiet moments where words weren't needed. Over the next few days, their connection deepened. They didn't talk about fame or music all the time. Sometimes they just walked around new cities, exploring hidden streets, buying coffee from small shops and watching street performers play. It reminded Lena why she loved what she did, not for the applause, but for the way music brought people together. In Vienna, they were scheduled to play in one of the most famous concert halls in Europe. The pressure was high. Reporters had already written articles about Julian's tour, featuring the rising star from a small town. Lena's name was starting to spread in places she never imagined. But with that fame came new expectations. The manager started giving her more instructions: how to dress, how to talk to the media, even how to smile for photos. She tried her best to follow along, but it all felt strange. The more attention she got, the less free she felt. One afternoon, just before rehearsal, Julian noticed her sitting alone in the corner, staring at her trumpet. Hey, he said softly, sitting beside her. You okay? She forced a smile. I'm fine. Just tired. He looked at her for a moment, then shook his head. You're not fine. You're thinking too much again. Lena sighed. Everything feels complicated. People are looking at me differently. I used to just play because it made me happy. Now I feel like I have to be perfect all the time. Julian nodded slowly. I know that feeling. It's easy to forget that the music comes first. She looked at him. Did you ever want to quit? He hesitated. More than once. But then I remember the kid I used to be, sitting on the floor with my trumpet trying to copy old jazz records. That kid would be heartbroken if I gave up. Lena smiled faintly. Mine would too. He reached out and gently tapped the side of her trumpet case. Then don't. The world needs your sound, the real one, not the one they try to shape. That night's concert turned out to be one of the most powerful yet. Something changed in both of them. Julian played with more emotion than usual, less showmanship, more soul, and Lena, inspired by his honesty, poured everything she had into her performance. The audience felt it. You could see it in their faces. The stillness, the tears, the smiles. After the final note, the hall erupted into applause that seemed to go on forever. Julian looked at Lena and whispered, That's what it's supposed to feel like. Backstage, the manager rushed up, excited. That was incredible. We've got invitations pouring in from other festivals. You two could keep this going for years. Lena smiled politely, but her heart wasn't thinking about fame or tours. It was thinking about how it felt to play freely again, about how the music had healed something in both of them. Later that night, they found themselves sitting outside near the river, the city lights reflecting off the water. Julian took out his trumpet and played a soft, slow melody that drifted into the cool night air. It wasn't a performance, and just music, simple and honest. When he stopped, Lena said quietly, That sounded like home. Julian smiled. Maybe that's because we both finally played from there. Lena looked up at the stars. Do you ever wonder what comes next? All the time, he said. But maybe that's the beauty of it. We don't have to know. We just keep playing. She nodded, feeling calm. I used to think I needed to prove myself. Now I just want to make people feel something. He looked at her thoughtfully. You already do. They sat there in silence again, listening to the river flow, the sound of the city fading into the background. The tour continued, but it was different now. Julian seemed lighter, more alive. Lena, too, played with a quiet confidence that came not from fame but from peace. They laughed more, shared more stories, and enjoyed every city they visited. But time moves fast, and before they knew it, the final concert of the tour was approaching. It was in London, a massive arena filled with thousands of fans, the biggest show yet. On the night of the concert, as they stood backstage waiting to go on, Julian turned to Lena and said, No matter what happens tonight, remember this. You changed me. You reminded me what music really is. Lena felt a lump in her throat. You changed me too. You showed me how far a melody can go. He smiled. Then let's make tonight count. When they walked onto the stage, the crowd roared. The lights were blinding, the sound thunderous, but for Lena, it all faded the moment she lifted her trumpet. She wasn't nervous anymore. She wasn't the quiet girl from the small town who hid behind her music. She was the girl who had found her voice and shared it with the world. The first note soared through the air, and with it, everything else disappeared. The fear, the doubts, the expectations. It was just music, pure, honest, and alive. When the final song ended, Julian and Lena stood side by side, the audience cheering so loudly it felt like the whole world was clapping. She looked at him and he nodded as if to say this is what it was all for. As they walked off the stage, Lena knew something deep inside her had shifted. Fame no longer mattered. What mattered was the music, the people it touched, and the journey that had brought her here. And even though the tour was ending, she knew the story wasn't. The music would go on, in her heart, in the hearts of those who listened, and in the quiet places where melody and memory met. The rain fell softly that morning, tapping against the window of the small apartment where Lena sat. Her trumpet case rested open on the table, next to a pile of letters and concert invitations. The tour had ended 2 months ago, but her life hadn't gone back to the way it used to be. Everything had changed. Her name was now known in places she had only ever seen on maps, and her music had reached hearts she'd never meet. But even with all that, Lena still found herself missing something. She missed the road, the laughter between shows, the late-night talks by the river, and most of all, she missed Julian. After the London concert, they had gone their separate ways for a while, Julian to rest and reflect, and Lena to visit home. They had promised to meet again, but life had a way of scattering people like leaves in the wind. Her small town looked almost the same when she returned, though the people greeted her differently now. Some called her a hero, others couldn't stop talking about her videos that had gone viral online. Kids from the local music school stopped her on the street, asking for tips on how to play like her. Lena smiled and encouraged them, but deep down she felt shy about it. She still saw herself as that same small-town girl who just loved the sound of her trumpet. She started teaching at the local music center on weekends, helping children who couldn't afford private lessons. It brought her peace. Seeing their excitement reminded her of how she once felt, years ago when her father handed her a trumpet for the first time. One day, after class, she was walking home when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, she immediately recognized the voice. "Still practicing?" Julian asked. Lena laughed. "Always. What about you?" "Trying to," he said. "But it's not the same without you on stage." "Same here," she admitted. The silence after a show feels strange. Julian paused. "I've been thinking about something. How would you feel about starting something new? Not another tour, but a project. Something that brings real music to people who never get to hear it live. Schools, hospitals, small towns, places forgotten by fame." Lena smiled. "That sounds perfect." And just like that, a new chapter began. Within months, they organized a small initiative called Music for All. It wasn't fancy or funded by big sponsors at first. Just 2 musicians traveling with their instruments, performing in places that needed hope more than applause. Their first stop was a children's hospital in Madrid. The kids were shy at first, watching curiously as Lena unpacked her trumpet. When she began to play, the room filled with warmth. Some children clapped along, others just listened quietly, their faces lighting up with joy. Julian joined in with a soft, steady tune that blended beautifully with hers. After the performance, one little girl tugged at Lena's sleeve. "When I grow up, I want to play like you," she said. Lena knelt down and smiled. "You can play even better. Just never stop loving it." Moments like that became the reason she woke up every morning with excitement again. As they continued their journey, they visited small towns, refugee shelters, schools, and community centers. Every place they went, they met people who had never seen a live performance before, but who understood every note with their hearts. The music became a bridge between strangers, a reminder that beauty could still exist in the simplest of moments. Julian seemed happier too. The heavy look that once followed him had faded. He laughed more, smiled more, and spoke often about how the music felt alive again. One evening, while they were setting up for a small open-air concert in a remote village, he looked at Lena and said, "You know, I used to think success was about playing the biggest stages. Now I realize it's about touching even one soul. Lena nodded. Music isn't measured by the size of the crowd, but by the heart behind it. The villagers gathered that night under the open sky, sitting on blankets and old chairs. There were no bright lights, no microphones, no cameras, just the sound of instruments and the whisper of the wind. As Lena played, she saw people holding hands, swaying gently, some with tears in their eyes. She knew then that this was what she was meant to do. Months passed and their project began to grow. People from all over started volunteering, donating instruments and helping organize events. What started as a small idea between two musicians had turned into a movement. But one morning, during a performance in a coastal town, something unexpected happened. As they finished their final song, Julian set down his trumpet and suddenly looked pale. Lena rushed to his side as he stumbled slightly. "I'm fine," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just dizzy. Too much sun." They took a break and he insisted it was nothing serious. But later that week, when they reached their next destination, Julian quietly told Lena that his doctor had advised him to rest for a while. Nothing life-threatening, but he needed to take things slower. Lena felt a lump in her throat. "You should have told me earlier. I didn't want to worry you," he said. "Besides, I couldn't stop now. This." He gestured to the small stage they had set up. "This makes me feel alive." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll rest, and when you're ready, we'll continue. The music can wait." He smiled weakly. The music never waits. It just changes tempo. After that, they decided to pause the traveling shows for a while. Lena continued performing with local musicians, keeping the project alive while Julian focused on recovery. They stayed in touch every day, sharing ideas, melodies, and memories. A few months later, Julian joined her again, not to play full concerts, but to mentor young artists who wanted to carry the mission forward. Together, they built a small foundation that offered scholarships and free music lessons to children from underprivileged areas. Their work began drawing attention again, but this time, it wasn't about fame. It was about purpose. News channels covered their story, calling it a movement that reminds the world why music matters. One afternoon, during a rehearsal at the foundation, a young boy nervously stood before Lena, holding a trumpet almost too big for his hands. "I can't make it sound right," he said, frowning. Lena knelt beside him and smiled. "It's not about getting it right. It's about letting it speak. Try again, but this time don't think about the notes and think about something you love." The boy took a deep breath and played a soft, shaky tune. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of feeling. Lena smiled proudly. "See? That's music," Julian, watching from across the room, clapped. "Looks like you've become quite the teacher," he said later with a grin. "I had a good example," Lena replied. Years passed. Their project spread across countries. Hundreds of musicians joined their cause, traveling to remote areas, teaching, performing, and sharing the same message that had started it all. Music belongs to everyone. One evening, after a long day of work, Lena and Julian sat outside the foundation building watching the sunset. The sky was painted in gold and lavender, and children's laughter echoed from inside where some students were still practicing. "Do you ever miss the big stages?" Julian asked softly. Lena thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No, this feels right. This feels real," he smiled. "You've come a long way, you know." "So have you," she said. "We both found what we were looking for, not on the stage, but out here, among people who listen with their hearts." Julian nodded. "Funny how a simple dare turned into all this." Lena laughed. "It was never just a dare. It was destiny in disguise." The evening breeze carried the faint sound of a trumpet from inside the building. One of the students was practicing the same melody Lena had played during the festival all those years ago. She listened quietly, feeling tears gather in her eyes, not of sadness but of gratitude. Music had brought her everything: courage, friendship, purpose, and peace. It had taken her from a small-town girl to someone who helped others find their voices. She turned to Julian. "Do you ever wonder what people will remember about us?" He smiled gently. "I hope they don't remember us. I hope they remember the feeling, the music, the kindness, the belief that something beautiful can come from anyone." Lena nodded, her heart full. "That's the best legacy we could leave." As the night settled, they sat there listening to the distant tune, knowing that their journey had come full circle. What began as a playful challenge had changed 2 lives, and through them countless others. For Lena, it was never about fame or glory. It was about the sound that lived deep inside her, the one that spoke when words could not. And as she closed her eyes, letting the music flow through the air, she smiled, because she knew that somewhere out there, someone was listening, and maybe, just maybe, finding a little hope in her song.